You know, some days I'll just randomly reflect on where I used to be, how I used to live, and the things that I used to do. And I know this probably sounds crazy to say, but I probably shouldn't be here right now. So I'm 2.5 years sober now, and I still catch myself wondering how the hell that happened. I'm going to tell my story, but in order to do so, I have to take it back to my younger years. I grew up in a small town outside of Edmonton, Alberta, and for the most part, in my really young years, life was pretty good, but my birth father ended up leaving when I was about 3 or 4 years old. It wasn't long after that my mother had met another man who I refer to as my father. He raised me from about 4 years old till I was about 14 years old. And for as long as I can remember, alcohol has always been a staple in my household growing up. Everybody that I know from a young age was always consuming alcohol. From my older siblings to my uncles and my aunties, my grandfather was a very heavy drinker, and my dad, who was a daily drinker. You know, he was the kind of guy that would, get up bright and early, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, and head off to work and come home with a case of beer. That was the norm for me. The first time I ever took a sip of alcohol, I was 6 years old, and it was completely by accident. My grandfather used to like to pour his beers into glasses, and my favorite drink as a child was apple juice. So we got to my grandparents' house for some get together, and I saw on his porch a big tall glass of beer. I thought it was apple juice. As an innocent young child, the first thing that came to my head was, I need to drink that right now. That looks good. But I race over to this glass of beer, and probably within, I shouldn't be laughing, but less than 20 seconds, I drank this entire glass. I drank it so fast as a child that I didn't even realize what I was drinking. Just a little glimpse into my younger years for you. But really, when things started to kick off for me with alcohol was about another 6 or 7 years later. I hadn't had another drink between 6 and 13 years old. Around the time I turned about 13 years old, my family and I had moved from the town I grew up in to another town a few hours away. And I started to hang out with some not so savory characters, some pretty troubled kids. And that became a pretty regular thing for me. I kind of just ended up gravitating towards the kids that were a little bit more rough around the edges, if you will. To give you a little bit more backstory quickly, I grew up very poor. We always had a home and we always had each other, but there were a lot of really tough times growing up. Losing our power, not really having much food in the house, if ever at all sometimes, So it wasn't an easy upbringing, but I was happy. I was a happy young kid, and, it was a fresh start moving to this small town. So it was January 15th, 2005, and it was late in the evening, and I was hanging around with some friends of mine, and one of my friends pulled out an old liquor bottle from their parents' bed. It was an old whiskey bottle, I don't know how old. We decided it would be a good idea to drink it, so that's what we did. There was 3 of us, and we just kind of sat around and drank this bottle of whiskey, and it was a lot. It was a lot of alcohol to consume for a 14-year-old boy. So needless to say, I got very intoxicated and ended up passing out on my friend's couch. I can't remember the exact time. I woke up in the middle of the night to grab a glass of water. They had a view out from their kitchen sink out into their driveway. And as I'm pouring this glass of water, I see a vehicle pull in. I see headlights pulling into the driveway. And something in me knew right away that something wasn't right. I can't explain it. It's just one of those things that you kind of feel. And I remember getting this rush of overwhelming dread. So shortly after, I heard a knock at the front door. And reluctantly, I walked over and I opened the door, and I saw my sister standing there, and I just remember looking at her face, and it looked like she had been crying for hours. She just looked so defeated. And she looks at me and she says, "Your dad had a massive heart attack and passed away." That was a really tough time in my life. And it was tough on my mother, and really it was tough on my family. I coined that moment in my life, the moment that my family fell apart. You know, he really was the glue that kind of held our family together. So it wasn't long after that my mother decided to sell the home that we had in this new little town that we lived in and move back to the old town I grew up in. It was around that time that I felt I couldn't be at home anymore. You know, I was 14 years old. I was experiencing death for the first time, at least for somebody that was very close to me. And it just didn't feel right living at home anymore. So I left. So throughout those years, I ended up working in the oil field. Young men growing up where I grew up tend to gravitate towards the oil field. It's commonplace where I'm from. I saw a lot of guys driving their nice brand new trucks, and they had all this money, and I wanted a piece of that. That's when things really started to take a dark turn. That's when I started to experiment with drugs. My mother ended up moving to British Columbia around the time I was about 17, 18 years old. During that period of my life, there were quite a few people around me that recorded and wrote rap music, and I was extremely influenced and very inspired by that. My dad was also a musician growing up. He played a lot of guitar, and he would sing around campfires. By the time I had turned 19 years old and things had started to really get bad for me, I mean, the crime, the drugs, the alcohol, the way of living, the way I had been living for years, I hit a turning point in my life. And I said, "Mom, I need to come out to live with you." And at the time, my mother was living on a small island in British Columbia. It was the Gulf Islands around the coast of Vancouver. And I had lived there for 2 or 3 years, I think. But at that time, I had met a partner, and life seemed like it was getting pretty good. But not a lot had changed. I was still the rough around the edges guy, getting into fights, which was really out of the ordinary for the people that I was surrounded with. They hadn't really grown up the way that I did. As you can probably imagine, I didn't have a lot of fans. In fact, it was the opposite. A lot of people didn't like me. But the drinking and the partying and all of that, none of it changed. The people that I ended up becoming closest with were relatively similar to the people that I had grown up with. The type of people that wanted to drink on a daily basis if they could. From one place to another, I was kind of right back where I started. But I wanted more. So I decided to move to Vancouver. And quite a few friends not only moved to Vancouver around the same time that I did, but there were friends that I had already known that were living in Vancouver. So I lived there for a few years and performed a lot of shows, recorded a lot of music, and met a lot of really interesting people. I was completely engulfed in this Vancouver music scene. But with all the good things came the same old lifestyle I'd always lived. Some crime, a lot of drugs this time around, and a lot of alcohol. And in order to support my lifestyle in Vancouver, because I wasn't making money off my music, let's be honest, I would go back up north and work in the oil field. I had jobs here and there in Vancouver as well, where I didn't have to leave, but to sum it up, that's pretty much how it went for me. Again, I had gotten to a point in my life where I needed another change. I was done with the big city life. I was over the music scene, and none of it really interested me anymore. I really did just want a quiet life, because believe me, when you're in the music scene in places like Vancouver, if you're not careful, it can kind of consume you. So here I am again on the phone with my mom. And of course, my mother, being who she is, said, "Pack your bags, Evan. My door is always open." Said goodbye to all my friends that I made in Vancouver. And I'd like to also add that I said goodbye to a lot of them for the last time. The type of people that I was hanging around with out there, I've never had any reason to contact again. Just thought I'd add that. So I pack my bags and I make my way to Vancouver Island. She moved from Pender Island to Victoria. So here I am, staying at my mother's place. I'm on employment insurance. I got nothing to do. This is where my addiction with alcohol really took a turn for the worst. It was at that point I had decided I wanted to be a gaming YouTuber and a Twitch streamer. And I did that for probably 5 years. And I made okay money doing it, actually. With that money and with that lifestyle gaming, I drank so much alcohol from the age of 25 years old till I was about 31 that I literally was dying. It had gotten to a point where alcohol was no longer making me feel good. It had very much so become medicine. In order to get rid of my shakes, my severe panic attacks, profuse sweating, heart palpitations, dizziness, all kinds of alcohol withdrawal symptoms, I needed to drink alcohol every single day, from the moment that I woke up to the moment that I went to bed. So by the time I turned 30 years old, I was a regular hospital visitor, at least once or twice every month or two. And they would pull me into the ICU and they would pump me full of liquids and IVs and give me all kinds of medications. And because if you're somebody that didn't know, alcohol withdrawals can be fatal. Being in the hospital as often as I was most definitely the lowest point of my life. But there is one particular moment that takes the cake. Among all of these hospital visits, I had been admitted to the local detox facility almost every time that I had made a hospital visit. I have been to the detox here in Victoria upwards of 30 times. But the moment that truly changed for me was when I was laying in the hospital, sicker than I've ever been, fuzzy-headed, disorientated, in and out of reality, seeing things, hearing things. The doctor had come in and sat at the foot of my bed. And he said, "Evan, we're gonna do our absolute best to fix you this time, but I don't know how good of a job we're gonna be able to do. You have done so much damage to your body, but more specifically to your brain." At that point, I had gone 6 days without a glass of water, 6 days without a single bite of food, and only alcohol in my system. We might have to change locations. See, it was at this exact moment when the doctor had told me I was dying that I said to myself, I think it's time I go to treatment. So that's what I did. There was a team that worked at the hospital that told me, we know of this great treatment center. We can set you up, get you all ready to go so we can send you there. So off I go again on another journey back to Vancouver. And I ended up going to a treatment center called Inner Visions. And despite being terrified to go to treatment and to experience that for the first time and surround myself with other people that had a very similar experiences to myself, not only did I think it was going to be the worst experience of my life, but I hated the idea of having treatment on my life resume, if you will. I didn't want it to be a part of my story. The only thing that really pushed me there was, well, I didn't want to die. And I met a lot of weird people. But amongst that weird group of people, I met some pretty awesome dudes. But here's the issue. My entire life was on Vancouver Island. So after I'd finished my 3-month stay at this treatment center, where I'd built all these connections and built my recovery plan and had all my resources around me, well, now it was time to go home. And I didn't have any of that at home. So it wasn't long after coming back to the island and going back to my apartment where I fell back into my old habits. I think I made it 30 days out of treatment before I found myself drinking again. And trust me when I say this, it did not take me long to get incredibly sick. I was hospitalized, I think, after 3 days of drinking. It really doesn't take very long to end up right back where you were as soon as you start. There's this common thought in addicts' heads. We can control it this time. This time's gonna be different. because I still could not grasp the fact of living the rest of my life without ever drinking alcohol. Very shortly after, I had been hospitalized, going through detox again. And before I knew it, I was off to my second treatment center. The team that had saw me for the first treatment center came back and saw me again. And they said, look, not every treatment center is for everybody. Let's get you to this other one and we'll see how you do there. And it was okay. It was a little bit different than the first one, but I actually preferred it more. And so I stuck it out. I was there for 3 months, 90 days, but I found myself in the same predicament that I was with the first treatment center. I was far away from my home. I'd built all these connections, built these resources, had this recovery group that I worked with, but when it was time to go home, I was giving all of that up. So I'm pretty sure we know where this is going. In my same apartment, and I think I made it about 2 weeks, right back into the hospital. How I survived this period of time is still a mystery to me, and I think I'm pretty sure I shocked some of the medical staff at even being able to make a recovery. I was pretty bad. So this is when I needed to take a step back from everything that I was doing with the treatment centers and the detox and the hospital and come up with a real plan. I had noticed what wasn't working, and I had noticed what did work. And the majority of the recovery work that I did in these treatment centers did work. But the fact that I didn't have the resources around me when it was time to leave is what didn't work. I had asked if there was any recovery housing in the city here that I live. And they looked at me and said, yeah, actually there is. It's not like treatment. It's a little different than treatment. And the programming is a little different. It's a place that you can go and work with people on your recovery. And that's exactly what I had been looking for. See, the barriers of treatment didn't necessarily work for me. So I immediately jumped on board and said, yes, I want to go to the recovery housing here in the city. I went from detox again, which is a 7-day stay, to what's called stabilization. And stabilization is a housing unit that you can stay at from anywhere from 2 weeks to 30 days. And in that time, I had been applying for recovery housing in the city, which is somewhere you can go to for a little bit longer of a stay. In my case, it was anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. And I got accepted. I was accepted to a recovery house that would take me on for 3 months. I ended up at this place, it's called The Grove, and the staff there were phenomenal. The guys that I was in the house with, 90% of them were great. Once I got to about 2 months at this recovery house, I was accepted into a long-term recovery house where you can stay up to 2 years. And that sounded fantastic to me. I said, let's do it. It's a house full of guys that are on the same journey as I am, doing their absolute best to stay sober, working with one another. So I got accepted into this housing unit called the Foundation House. And right away, I recognized a problem for me. There were so many guys crammed inside. It was not a very big house at all. So I was at this recovery house for about 2 weeks. And that's when I decided I need a weekend away. And I had been doing so good and I'd been impressing the staff there for the 2 weeks that I was there that I walked up to them and I said, I need a weekend pass. And they took one look at me and they said, absolutely, Evan, whatever you need. But you know what was running through my head? Something that took me forever to admit to myself that I had previous engagements in my head. I didn't want a weekend pass to go and gather some of my stuff at my apartment. I wanted to get the hell out of that house and go and drink at my apartment. At this point, I was, I believe, just shy of 6 months sober, and it was gone, just like that. Within less than 15 minutes, I was out the door and walking through those liquor store front doors. Down the rabbit hole I go. Spent probably about a month drinking in my apartment. The windows are closed, the doors are shut, barely eating, barely drinking any water, and just drinking myself to death. Back to the hospital we go. I knew what was working, I had a plan, and I just needed to execute it. So I requested, send me back to detox, let me get sober again. Don't give up on me yet, I'm not giving up on me yet, send me back. And in through the doors comes one of the employees at that first recovery house I was at, called The Grove. And I'll remember this moment for the rest of my life too, because it's the first time I ever heard anyone say this. Because people had seen how hard I had worked on my recovery. This gentleman sat down in front of me and he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're coming back to the Grove. We're getting you back in there." And I looked at him and I said, "Why? Why are you giving me another chance?" And he looks at me and he says, "Your reputation precedes you, my friend." I'd never gotten so much respect from anybody in my entire life. And that was a strong moment for me that really painted a picture that if you are someone who continues to work hard at something, when you're working alone, you're doing the work when no one's watching, at some point, people are gonna notice. So here I am back in the Grow for another 3 months, and things are going better than they've ever gone. I make it through the majority of those 3 months, and I'm accepted into another recovery house. This time, it was a recovery apartment building. In this specific recovery house, you get your own apartment. You have meetings every other day where you all get together with everyone else in the recovery program, and you all sit down, you have coffee in the morning, and you talk, and you just discuss your things like your recovery routine, what you like to do, what you're doing for your recovery. Are you going to meetings? Are you not going to meetings? You know, it's a very open floor, get your recovery in your own hands kind of situation, which is something that I respected and appreciated so much. Because I've always been an independent guy, being able to control how I did my own recovery, and I think it was paramount to my success. It was during my time in that last recovery house when I met my beautiful fiancée, who I live in this quaint little home with. And that's when things really started to change for me because of all the failures that I had along the way. Every single time I got up and I failed, and I got up and I failed, and I got up and I failed. During every single one of those times I fell, I learned something new. In recovery, they call it our tool bag. And we walk around with this invisible tool bag that's loaded with all the tools in it that we need specifically to get the job done. We're somebody on a job site, we have a specific job to do, we know how to do it, and I have all the tools I need to get it done. And you can have multiple people on a job site doing the exact same job, but you might notice that all of our tool bags have a little bit of different stuff in it because that's what works for us. And each and every single time I fell, I picked up a tool. And as I was getting up to try again, I was putting that tool in my tool bag. And then I'd try to do the job and I'd fail. There's another tool. This one looks like it'll work. It was never one thing that got the job done for me. It was a combination of all these little tools that I accumulated. Denzel Washington says this quote, and it sums it up so perfectly.
Fall forward. This is what I mean. Reggie Jackson struck out 2,600 times in his career, the most in the history of baseball. But you don't hear about the strikeouts. People remember the home runs. Fall forward. Thomas Edison conducted 1,000 failed experiments. Did you know that? I didn't know that. Because the 1,001st was the light bulb. Fall forward.
And that's effectively what I did during my recovery. Maybe from an outside perspective, it didn't really look like I was making progress. And even to myself, I didn't think I was making progress. But every single time I fell, I was falling forward just a little bit. It's wild looking back at all the struggle and the chaos and the destruction, the hospital visits, the detox, the friendships I've lost along the way, but I'm still here. And I'm so grateful. So I guess if you've made it this far in the video, you're probably curious, what did you manage to do in those 2.5 years? Tell us some of your accomplishments. Well, I'm standing in one of them. I'm surrounded by someone every single day that I love very dearly, who loves me for who I am today. I got a job doing mental health and addiction work in the same community that changed my life. I can confidently say that I've helped other people through their recoveries. I also started my own Indigenous clothing brand. It's not doing the best right now, but it's mine, and I started it. And the experiences that I've had since starting my clothing brand have been life-changing. And something else that I didn't mention in the video until now is I'm an Indigenous man to Canada, Plains Cree to be specific. And during my recovery, for the first time in my life, I found a true connection to my culture and my creator. And it's the most powerful thing that I've ever experienced in my life. And I do my absolute best to pray every single day. Everything that I've prayed for since the beginning of my recovery has come true. I prayed for the Creator to introduce me to a loving, caring woman. I prayed for a safe home for us to live in. I prayed for the health and well-being of my loved ones and myself every day. The amazing people that stepped up and helped me through all of my struggles. My mother was diagnosed with lymphoma cancer. She got treatment for that and it started to go away. And almost immediately after getting the good news that her lymphoma was in remission, she was diagnosed with lung cancer. I remember feeling like the entire world was falling apart. My mother, in my eyes, is a hero. And I would not be here today if it weren't for her overwhelming support and her unconditional love for me. She's my hero. But I prayed every day for her safety, health, and well-being, and the Creator granted that for me. This isn't a religious thing. I'm not trying to convince anybody of what they should or should not believe in. This is just what I believe in. It's who I am to my roots. But I say one of the things that I really, truly cherish today in my 2.5 years of sobriety is the freedom that I have. The freedom to wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning when the rest of the world is asleep and just be and live. The truth is, when you get sober, the only thing that's holding you back from accomplishing any of your dreams is yourself. So that's why I'm here today. I'm taking a leap that I've always wanted to do, but I've never had the guts to do it. And that's to put myself out on YouTube, where hopefully other people will find a connection and relate to my story. And even if they can't relate to my story, they just enjoyed hearing it. It wasn't happiness I was chasing in my recovery. It was purpose. And every day I wake up and I build towards that purpose. I'm working every single day to become the man that I want to be for my partner, for my family, for my friends around me, and hopefully a future child. I would love to start a family. During the process of this video, I've been trying to think of what the old me would say to my current day self. The old me that was so trapped, so lost, so broken and defeated and beaten down. I do know one thing. While in my addiction, I would see other people that were sober and had managed to achieve sobriety. And I would always ask them the same thing. What's it like to be sober for a long time? I've never heard a single person in recovery tell me that it wasn't worth it. So thinking back as the old me, what would I say to myself? If I could be one of those people that stood over my hospital bed, looking at my own self, I would probably have to look myself in the face and say, it's time to man up. You've been a little boy your whole life, and you've done nothing but run from your problems. And get on that path to becoming a man. And I know what you might be thinking. It's toxic to tell somebody to man up. It's not, though. It's not, because that's exactly what I had to do to get sober. And I'm still on that path every single day. If you found this video and you're struggling through addiction, you were meant to see this. If you're somebody that's in recovery already, you were meant to see this. And if you're somebody that's just stopping by, I also think you were meant to hear this. And I want to say thank you for watching the entire video to the end. I would greatly appreciate it if you would hit the subscribe button, maybe leave a like, and consider coming back with the notification bell, because I got a lot of stories to tell. I got a whole hell of a lot more journey in front of me, and I'm going to be sharing it with you right here. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. My name is Evan. This is my YouTube channel, and I'll see you in the next one.